Welcome to this, your active debate on cybersecurity in the EU, why we need NIS2 and what changes does it mean for the tech sector. I'm Brian Maguire. Our event today is sponsored by Huawei, and you can follow the debate at hashtag EA Debates, and please tweet your comments using the hashtag. Our social media team will respond to you there. And to ask questions, go to the chat section and use the Ask button. Cybersecurity is one of the European Commission's top priorities and a cornerstone of the digital and connected Europe. An increase of cyber attacks during the COVID crisis has shown how important it is to protect hospitals, research centres and other critical infrastructure. According to the Commission, the review of the Directive on Security Network and Information Systems, NIS2, is an essential step towards a more resilient Europe, ensuring state-of-the-art risk management of current and emerging cyber threats to vital sectors of the EU economy and society. NIS2 proposal covers new services such as the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, medical devices and chemicals, the food sector, wastewater and waste management, postal and courier services, as well as public administration. And the new text aims to address several shortcomings of the NIS1 directive. It categorizes companies into essential and important based on the criticality of their services and subjects the two categories to different supervisory regimes. So here to discuss this with us today is Svetlana Penkova, a member of the European Parliament and a member of the ITRE committee in the European Parliament. Tamara Tafra, a councillor on cyber issues and hybrid threats at the Croatian permanent representation to the EU. Clara Jordan, Chief Public Policy Officer at the Cyber Peace Institute, and David Harmon, EU Cybersecurity and Privacy Director at Huawei. Thanks to all of you for joining us today and taking the time to be with us. And I'm going to give each of you about 60 seconds just for your opening comments as well. Svetlana Penkova, let's start with you. 60 seconds.
I hope you can hear me and see me well. Cybersecurity in the EU is an ongoing matter that we should discuss, and we should keep updating the regulation on that point. And with the COVID pandemic and the increased usage of the online services in all aspects of our life, we've seen an increased risk in the cybersecurity space, which means we have a lot of work still to be done there.
Thank you so much. Tamara Tafra, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you all. I will just continue and saying that cybersecurity in Europe is extremely important, which the last year and a half has shown. And the magic word is harmonization. And this is something that this directive is trying to achieve, to have a more harmonization in the cybersecurity at the European level. Thank you.
Thank you. Clara Jordan.
Thank you, Brian. Just really to continue on the thread, not only we see the amount of cyber attacks increase, but what is also increasing is the societal harm and societal impact of these cyber attacks. We've seen it, with the healthcare sector, with the pharmaceutical industry, now with the food supply or pipeline. So really, with a lot of the things that this new directive is proposing is to address not only the sort of the scale of the attacks, but really how detrimental they have been to society and what their sort of societal and individual impact has been. Thank you.
Thank you. David Harmon.
Well, I mean, the last time the EU put in place a NIS directive, a directive dealing with the security of information systems in 2016. So the world has changed quite a lot since then. And the process of digitalization has intensified in terms of its involvement in modernizing vertical industries in the areas of energy or financial services, in the area of agriculture and transport. So as the European Union, the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Council, is it correct that these institutions are looking to review the NIS1 directive? Absolutely is the answer to that question. But a further question that has to be answered in that context is, what are the rules that are going to be put in place to regulate what companies fall under the scope of NIS2? And that's a debate that's intensifying in Brussels at this time.
Thank you. Svetlana, is the scope of this too broad? Is it too much being packed into the new directive?
It is, I mean, this is a difficult question to answer. However, yeah, of course, the scope has been extended, but it's been extended for a reason. Like now you've mentioned some of the sectors which it does include with the increased scope, but it also includes sectors such as the cloud and data services, aerospace, telecoms, central government IT systems. The reason for having them also added is because they need to be first of all protected in terms of the consumers that are using them, and we are proposing a regulatory framework that would be helpful for them more or less.
Thank you. Clara Jordan, same question. Is the scope too wide? Is there overreach here? Is the mission creep? Is the Commission going too far?
I mean, I don't think so, because again, given the criticalities of the sector, that are mentioned or extended, it is absolutely necessary that the regulation is extending, that we introduce that risk management sort of mindset that, this directive is proposing, that we're moving really to determining which sectors would fall, by the member state based on their risk profile. I mean, that is absolutely crucial. So if we think about, for example, what happened with the election infrastructure in 2016 in the United States, they were not designated necessarily as the critical infrastructure. So, we are moving not to, the name of the entity, but really to the risk profile. So absolutely, necessary. The enforcement might be challenging on the side of the EU, but I would say that, if the regulator, demands all these obligations and imposes them, then they have to step their game up as well on the enforcement.
Thank you. Tamara, if you talk about the harmonization across Europe, why does France care about the water sewage treatment system in Croatia? Why does it need to be a supranational approach to this?
First of all, I'll go a little bit back in time in 2016 when we adopted the NIS1, which was the first cybersecurity legislation trying to regulate and trying to introduce the new elements for cybersecurity in the whole Europe, so European EU-wide regulation. And it was actually a good success and good story, which has contributed to more security in the Europe. Of course, it's just 5 years. Somebody will, ask why we need to change something that's only 5 years old. But this is the area where the technology and the events are progressing very quickly, and it's developing very quickly, and we need to react. That's why we have, the Commission has proposed, and we are also currently discussing about the scope and what should be actually included, because what is necessary for this regulation is to be future-proof, so that we include everything that in several years is going to be critical. I mean, the recent events have shown that health infrastructure was very critical for all member states. We never know when the water is going to be critical, and that's why we need to have, thinking in advance and thinking how to protect everything that can influence the whole society. And that's why, now the negotiations are ongoing in the Council. We are discussing, of course, scope is one of the most important questions during the negotiations. But, we need to make a regulation that is, first of all, future-proof, and second, that will have impact on the cybersecurity in Europe. So great impact on the cybersecurity and enhance cybersecurity, because the resilience is the word that we are, trying to introduce on level, and mainstream cybersecurity actually on level. This is also one of the elements of this directive, is to raise awareness, not just, on the ICT level, of the technical level of the companies, but also on managerial level of the companies. So everybody is aware of the importance of cybersecurity, not just for them, for their companies and entities, but also for the whole society. And that's why, the negotiations are progressing very well. And we are also looking forward to hear the report from the Parliament, and also to the soon trialogues with the Parliament on the issues that are still open in the whole process.
Thank you. We'll come back to those issues that are still open in a few minutes. But Svetlina, What's changed in 5 years? We could have had foresight about hospitals being critical infrastructure, water treatment plants being critical as well 5 years ago. Is it the scale of the threat that's changed? Is technology that's changed? Or is it just awareness in public policy that has changed? How do you see it?
The easy answer to this question is everything has changed. I mean, we've literally seen for the last 18 months that the technology development jumped. They say like, what's the equivalent of probably 7 or 8 years of development just because of the situation we were facing. So the short answer is, yeah, everything has changed. And I think for that matter, the regulator's perspective had changed as well, in the sense that we understand that the technological development quite often moves much faster than the regulation itself, which creates certain burdens for everyone who is involved as a stakeholder, and more explicitly for our for the European citizens and for the consumers of those services. So I think probably one of the most important aspect of what we should be looking at the moment is, it has already been mentioned, and it's one of the main prerogatives of the NIS, is the harmonization, because that's one of the main differences if we look back 5 years from now. Now, when we speak about the essential operators, or like the scope of that directive, we're no longer speaking of something that's defined at the member state level, but at the European level, which is the right step forward, giving us confidence that as a regulator on that matter, we would have a broader view, and would hopefully be able to react much faster compared to the national governments on that matter. And it probably gives more security in terms of how the process would go on in the future.
Thank you. David, when we talk about future-proofing and harmonization, what do you think that means for Europe as well? Can we really future-proof technology? Can we really make our systems that much more resilient?
I mean, a point I'd like to emphasize is the European Union comprises 27 countries, and it's a political process in itself. And it is a core policy objective of the European Commission, the European Parliament, European Council in its broadest sense, to integrate and work more closely on a range of policy matters. And that includes now in the field of cybersecurity. So, I mean, you asked the question, why would somebody in France be interested in the cybersecurity of a company operating in Croatia? I mean, cybersecurity is everyone's business. Cybersecurity is the business of all governments and companies across the length and breadth of the European Union. At the core of what the European Union stands for is the promotion of the internal market in Europe, an internal market where there's free movement of goods, persons, services and capital. And all of these matters connected to cybersecurity are interlinked in that process. So actually, it is very important that in the context of policies pursued by the EU institutions in the area of cybersecurity, that the internal market and the operation of the internal market is promoted and not fragmented. And that would be an issue that Huawei would like to see addressed in the context of the debate. That we did see that when it came to the rollout of the 5G toolbox, that different member states had different interpretations as to how that toolbox could be implemented. And in the context of the discussions now, in the draft text or in the text that have been discussed by the European Parliament, there are proposals that governments could look at non-technical factors in evaluating the security risk that suppliers could have for European businesses. And evidently, we would recommend that organisations like NIS2, working closely with EU member states and enshrined within the NIS2 proposal, it's a closer cooperation between NIS2 and the 27 member states of the European Union, whether it's through organisations like the Cooperation Group or the CCERT organisation, that common certified and technical standards be enshrined in the criterion that are used in evaluating the security of supply chains and the security of suppliers working within that process, because what businesses want is some certainty in how these matters are going to be rolled out. And that's a central discussion that's now taking place within the ITRA committee of the European Parliament, and evidently at the level of the Council, where Tamara is representing too.
Thank you. Clara, is this, when we talk about resilience, is this a defensive democracy approach, or is this a defensive economy approach and the single market, as David has laid out?
You know, I think it's both, but I think really here for me, what's important to realize, and I you know, I commend a lot of the novelties of the directive, is that I think there's also this understanding of this interconnected, you know, finally interconnected nature of our systems. If you look at supply chain attacks that really paralyzed, you know, several countries, you know, I think there is this real understanding that cybersecurity and regulation, and they don't happen, you know, in an isolated way. They happen in a geopolitical context. You know, they happen in a context where if the EU wants to project resilience, you know, all the countries have to work together in a harmonized way, you know, to have those resilient society, whether it's a resilient society from the democratic perspective or, you know, from the market perspective. So, and I also think that there's a lot of focus on digitization from e-governance services and all that, you know, where EU and governments actually realize sort of the potential that can have for citizens. And they came to a realization that, you know, to really unlock the potential of the technology that they want to provide to their citizens in terms of services, you know, they have to first secure it. So, you know, for me, it's really that is the key sort of realization, and it's both for the market and it's both for democracy. I would say there, you know, it's two of the pillars of the European Union that you know, I would say almost everything revolves around these things. And if you look at the scope of the potential organizations that would fall within the scope, you know, it really covers both. I would also say that what has been really a positive development in terms of this societal resilience and technical resilience are all these developments in the proposal around the, you know, the stability of the system. If you look at the, you know, what's being proposed around DNS, the domain name system, or the trusted service providers, I mean, there is a real realization that the backbone of the internet, you know, can create, you know, serious security risks for the users, for the individuals, for the businesses, but also for the stability of the internet. So really, you know, it's amazing if you look at the scope of it, how they really think, how those, you know, who drafted it and worked on it and contributed it, thought about, you know, this whole ecosystem from the backbone to democracy, you know, to market and technology.
Thank you. Tamara, and then bring in Svetlina on this as well. What are the bottleneck issues here in terms of what we're going to see in the legislative process? What issues do you see the Parliament have with this going forward? Tamara?
Well, the report is still not officially out, so I will not comment the report of the Parliament. I will just say from our discussions, which are progressing very well, thanks to the Slovenian presidency, which is doing an excellent job regarding this directive and conducting the negotiations in the Council. We are progressing very well. I must say the main issue, I think it's going to be as the same, which we're going to have also with the Parliament, is the scope. Here there are different views what needs to be also included, but also the intention of member states to have a little bit of flexibility to include those companies, those entities which they considered are, according to a risk assessment, very important to be in the scope of directives, and they're not. From the perspective of the small country, we have also very big concerns about the small and micro enterprises. And of course, we will try not to introduce additional administrative burden to them, especially because those companies are backbone of our economy. So we need to also try to find a solution and a proper balance between security and economy. And of course, the issue of reporting. This is something that's still, let's put it like this, an open issue, and it's going to be also, I think, one of the discussion with the Parliament in upcoming months, how the reporting and the time of the reporting of incidents should look alike. And just to follow up of what previous speakers have said regarding the existing structures, the NIS1 has introduced something called NIS Cooperation Group, which is the group consisting of the member states with the help and of ENISA and European Commission. And it's actually the group which is behind the 5G toolbox. It's the group that's behind also the Cyclone network. So they have produced a lot of very valuable and very good stuff in the last few years. And the directive is going to actually also enhance and give credit to their work also for the future. So CSTAT network is also one of the structures that's very important, and it's actually came from the NIS1. So as said, we have already structures that are very good in combating and addressing the cybersecurity risks. And those structures are going to be also continuing to work, and also in the new scope of the NIS2.
Thank you. Let's go to Svetlina. Parliament, what's the discussion? Where is this report likely to land? What are the issues?
So this report would be voted in ITRE on the 28th of October, and I can just highlight some of the priorities that our group was defending in the matter of those negotiations. I personally wasn't involved in the actual negotiations. So something which is quite important and is finding place now in the compromise. We see how it goes from then on. The provisions to defend privacy by design and strong data protection, specifically in the context of cybersecurity. We also managed to achieve and include a provision on the member states to integrate AI technology, open source application in the national cybersecurity strategies. In terms of one of our main group priority was the cybersecurity capacity building and training, which is support for the SMEs, and those are incorporated in the final compromises. I think those are some of the key matters which we managed to achieve in the group, and of course there are many more, but I don't want to waste time on going line by line with each one of them.
Go line by line later then. Thank you. This we actually had a question on this as well from TG, who TG is, so thank you for that. Asking you to specifically outline some of the issues you're dealing with there as well. We also have another question from Goran Gote, who's going to come in just a second, and just to encourage our audience to send your questions now. We'll put those to a panel as we go through the discussion as well. Clara, you mentioned the word backbone in terms of DNS services, for example, and Tamara mentioned also backbone in the context of micro businesses, small businesses across Europe being the backbone of Europe's economy as well. When we talk about cybersecurity, we tend to look at the big issues here, the big players and the big networks, but it's the weakest link that risks bringing down the whole system. So it's interesting to me that the DNS element, it could be the weakest link because all the small players are involved there. The economy can be substantially damaged if that network is damaged as well. Do you think it's prudent to give so much scope to small micro businesses to opt out or to not be for these measures not to be enforced, or do we need much more governmental support to ensure that there's a higher standard for micro and small businesses as well, and that this should be part of the package that's built into NIS2? Clara.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the policymakers and decision makers always have this really, important balance to strike. And I think when you look at sort of the DNS and the small and micro entities, which have exceptions in this proposal, I think there I would assume that the thought was behind the potential harm and impact that can be inflicted, and I think the assumption or the calculation was that if you're a micro entity, the reach of a potential sort of DNS related security risk is smaller. But it was mentioned, the capacity building element should be, for me, part of any regulatory proposals, and this is not just for the small organizations that will be within the scope, but it's also for the countries who will have to do their own legislation and work on these lists of entities. I think in the past 5 years, that level, it was mentioned, all these, the working groups and the cybersecurity competence networks, I think they really help to elevate sort of the capacity of a lot of countries that would, struggle with implementation of these things, So for me, capacity building has to go both, from the EU to the smaller member states. And within every member state, it does have to be part, of any legislative or regulatory measures, because without that, you can have information sharing, you can have reporting, you can have the best measure in place. We particularly seen this with information sharing, that there are these mechanisms, but the organization have no capacity and capability to ingest it and act on it. So it should be absolutely part of any legislative or regulatory proposal, both towards the member states from the EU and within to small businesses. And there's been a wonderful range of initiatives, both from the EU institutions, member state, and the not-for-profit community, actually, to increase the resilience and make the cybersecurity a little easier for these small entities. If you tell them go implement the top 10 NIS controls, they don't know what it means. They don't even know, how do you pick your AV, which is a total baseline in cyber hygiene for us. So I think it's not only the guidance, it's really the tools, that these organizations have to be given.
Thank you. David, when we talk about capacity building, just as Clara's led out here as well, and she mentioned the role of government, NGOs, example, these different initiatives that are already in place. What role is there for big tech to be able to develop and support capacity building here as well? Because it's not just that you're supplying services and companies like yours are supplying services, but there's a supply chain there as well, which you can help develop as well. Do you think that big tech has a substantial role to play in capacity building in partnership with government?
I do indeed. I mean, from the perspective of Huawei, we have very serious baselines to guarantee that cybersecurity is enshrined within all our processes, from design, from R&D, through to marketing, through to testing, through to validation, through to maintenance. And also, we come from the school of thought that this is a shared responsibility. So high-level technical standards should be set in cooperation with key leading international organizations, whether it's in the context of the GSMA or the ITU. In fact, Huawei as a company have certifications from 170 different international certified organizations. So in fact, it is an absolute shared responsibility. And it was referenced earlier on in this debate that part of the objective of NIS2 is also to raise awareness. This is very important too, because you can't decompartmentalize cybersecurity away from looking at other EU legislation, whether it's in the field of data governance or new data strategies or even AI strategies. In fact, the whole process is interlinked. So Huawei as a company can demonstrate best practices in this field, very serious best practices. But in fact, the whole ambit of the stack, so to speak, should be working together to set ultimately global technical and certified standards, because that gives the surety and the certainty that businesses are looking for in this context.
Thank you. We have a question for Clara and David here from Javier Villegas Burgos. Javier is from Vodafone. So both Clara and David mentioned supply chain attacks and telecom equipment vendor risk, but NIS2 doesn't list the ICT supply chain players as important or essential entities. Shouldn't we apply the same risk management and reporting regime to all, Clara?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, I think the supply chain attacks have shown us that, it could be one of the key elements of any sort of resilience strategy to thinking about, the supply chain. Now, perhaps those more on the inside and closer to the drafting can explain, why were some of the, decision taken. I mean, for me, if you look at the NIS2, there is a requirement to assess and take into account the overall quality of products and cybersecurity practices, the suppliers and the service providers, and including the secure development procedures. So for me, it's a very important sort of first step. And I think currently absent any EU-wide certification and a lot of the things that David was mentioning, I think if we can start to align with well-established standards and mutual recognition of schemes, I think that is a first important, that's a first important step. But should it be, absolutely, is there a positive development in the current draft? I would say yes, but I think it's also it's a progress and it's a process to understand these issues. And I think the EU is also trying to regulate at the level where they can build a standard that the member states sort of can follow across the board.
Okay, just on that as well, is this the risk that if we go for the lowest common denominator, we fail to be sufficiently resilient and we fail to achieve the target here, Clara?
I think that's always a risk. But for me, even if you elevate the weakest link, and you build it at the next level, bring it to the next level, that's already improvement. I don't think we're going totally for the lowest common denominator. If you look at what the proposal writes, but on the supply chain, I do think that the directive could have been a bit more ambitious.
Thank you. David, on the same question, just in response to Javier there as well, shouldn't we apply the same risk management and reporting regime to all?
Well, I mean, that's the core of the debate that's taking place now in the European Parliament, the European Council, where there's a distinction been drawn between essential businesses and important businesses. But I mean, at the core of this proposal for NIS2 is the elimination of the distinction between the operation of essential services and digital service providers. And also it is a clear priority of NIS2 that EU member states, together with NIS, have to draw up very clear risk assessment plans to identify what are the risks to the supply chain within respective member states and across the European Union. And again, we come from the school of thought that enshrined within the proposal should be a commitment to zero trust approach. We would like to see harmonized standards, agreed, certified and resilient standards that can ensure that that people involved, companies involved, know where they lie in the context of the requirements of NIS2. And we think that's really very important that this zero trust approach be taken.
Thank you. Tamara, Svetlina, just on this, do you want to add anything else to Javier's question here? Tamara? No? Okay,
I mean,
fine.
the scope is still under discussion, so it's still not clear what's going to be everything in the scope. So this is something that's still, a work in progress. I mean, and also there is a one reference in the proposal, which also calls for certification of some ICT products, processes, and services for certain entities. So there are some security clauses that are already introduced in the current text and might stay also for the final one. But I would like to stress out that here it's the important also to have in mind that yes, I agree that the whole cycles should be protected, but we also have Cybersecurity Act, which was one of the regulation adopted a few years earlier on the certification of ICT products, services, and processes. So we do have this, synergies between different cybersecurity legislation, and these synergies should also be introduced in the practice. And the NIS2 is trying to, not just with the Cybersecurity Act and the cybersecurity legislation, but also with other legislation such as DORA, which is on the financial sector, and also other sectoral legislations that are upcoming, to try to have the minimum standards and for all of those entities that are, according to the risk assessment, critical, and which are very important for the society at large. So, I mean, there are some tips and clauses in the current proposal which actually are going in this direction to have the security of the whole cycles. And just one small short remark on the capacity building, if you allow me. Here, I would also remind that we have a regulation on competence center, which actually was foreseeing the help and for the small and micro and medium-sized enterprises, but also for research communities to engage more and to build more upon the cyber hygiene and build upon more on the capacities to be able to be resilient, but also to address and to be able to recover from the cybersecurity incidents. Thank you.
Thank you. Recovery, I think, is an important element to this as well. We'll come back to that. A question also, this one, Clara, you got a buy on this. It's for Tamara, David, and Svetlina from Maria Chiara Paperzi. And she says, what is your opinion related to the reporting deadline for incidents? Do you consider the 24 hours deadline as feasible? Svetlina.
Sorry.
Okay.
I hope now I'm...
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, you're on. So do you think the 24-hour reporting deadline for incidents is feasible?
Well, I think it's this is one of the new parts of the proposal, and I think the strict timelines is something which has been agreed, so it is feasible, and so there is a difference between the fact that the entities should report significant incidents that happened in a matter of 24 hours. And the incidents that are affecting the underlying data within 72 hours. And starting from the point that we're thinking of the protection of consumer data, we believe it's feasible.
Thank you. David, Tamara, anything else to add to that?
It is the case that a number of companies do feel that the 24-hour limit is a little tight, and that's still going to have to be resolved with the discussions that take place primarily at trilogue between the Commission, the Parliament and the Council over the next number of months.
Thank you, David. Tamara?
No, I just said that for us it's feasible because we already have it at the national level. We introduced it with NIS1. So it's possible. It's of course, it also depends what kind of reporting is going to be done in this 24 hours. So this is something that we also need to discuss in the Council and afterwards with the Parliament, what is actually asked from the entities to report in 24 hours.
Thank you. Another question from Goran Gotev. Goran's from BlackBerry, and this goes to Svetlina and Tamara. Where do you expect to see interlinks between NIS2 and the Cyber Resilience Act announced by President von der Leyen at the State of the Union? Tamara, you mentioned this briefly. Do you want to respond to this first?
Yeah, I mean, the Cyber Resilience Act is a regulation actually in IoT, which is foreseen to be presented in 1 year, so next autumn to 2022. Of course, this is the area which is at the moment not covered with regulation, and IoT market is raising rapidly. So we already had in the council discussion last year that some regulation is needed for the IoT products. And hopefully this Resilience Act is going to cover the area which is at the moment not covered with the cybersecurity regulation. Of course, that, I mean, as said earlier, the NIS2 is already trying to find synergies with current existing cybersecurity regulation. So we are hoping that also the Resilience Act is going to be compatible and had added value also for the cybersecurity in the European Union.
Thank you. Svetlina?
I think Tamara have already mentioned the fact that most of that is to be seen once the proposal comes out. But one common aspect could be the risk management requirement for connected devices. And also there could be an overlap regarding the certification provisions.
Thank you. Clara, a question from Tapir, and he says, do you agree with including social media platforms in the scope? Are they really that important to society and to the economy?
I think it's, as you mentioned before, these two pillars of the EU, sort of, the democracy and market and economy, if you really think about a potential harm and impact, that can be inflicting, through the misuse of the tools these platforms are providing, that I think it's absolutely now part of these conversations. I think the platforms have been, calling for sort of more, regulation and understanding of their responsibilities, but it's really the realization again, of the importance. I mean, these platforms are not only for communications. I mean, if you look at Instagram, for example, it's perhaps not the best example in this debate. I mean, it's an important tool for micro businesses. A lot of businesses do business through these platforms now. So I think it's an important step in realizing the importance they have not only for the society, democracy, societal well-being, cohesion, mental health, but also for the economy in the EU. And I think it is one of the objectives of the European Union to support, small businesses. It was mentioned before that it's the backbone of the economy. I think we have quite a lot of research to prove that. And so I think there is this need to include them in these conversations. And if I may, just say something very briefly on the reporting, because I think it's an important point to make. There's been an enormous amount of research that have shown how important early reporting is. If you report early, you prevent the lateral movement, you have a chance to prevent the lateral movement, of an adversary in your network. So if we think that the primary objective of the directive is the resilience, understanding what is happening in one place and then being able to report it, but Tamara mentioned it's going to depend on what we will have to report. But I think that requirement, of reporting and early reporting just should, it's time to make it, a best practice and regulation. So I think that reporting provision, it was mentioned, it's been agreed on. I think that it's one of the, biggest opportunities to improve the resilience. And again, placing this in a geopolitical context, this can really help prevent, the lateral movement, as we've seen through various attacks, that they got in from one side, we didn't know it, and when they ended up was much more serious. So sorry for taking an opportunity to respond to that as well.
No, thank you for that. I just to build on that also is that the reporting burden falls disproportionately depending on the size of the business as well, and so the enforcement elements could also fall disproportionately and be overly punitive of smaller micro businesses who simply just don't have capacity on their side to either identify a risk or breach or to ensure that best practice is maintained at sufficiently high level as well, Clara. So, do you think this is it's not just a matter of the regulation and the benchmarking here, but Should there be scope for the deployment of support services within NIS2 as well? Should that be funded? Are these elements that you think should be included within the package, Clara?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's part of the the capacity building, and giving the tools, as I mentioned, to these small organizations to do that. So I really do hope that we will try to reach sort of for the sky, in these requirements, but then both the EU and then the government in their own sort of actions around this, they will make it part. But I think the capacity building, to do this, and again, it's not just to say that they should do something, it's really giving them the practical tools they can do that, that are easy to use, and that are understandable, and they don't create additional burden on these organizations. I mean, I think the tech sector has shown amazing level of innovation in coming up with different solutions to do these things, and I think it's the capacity building to meet these requirements is absolutely key.
Thank you. Tamara, we talk about future-proofing, and we're 5 years after NIS1, now we're in NIS2. 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about NIS3. With the speed of AI development and deployment, the rise of quantum to come within perhaps the next 5 years as well. Will this directive be obsolete before it really gets a chance to bite? Tamara?
I mean, it's not for sure, because NIS1 is still very valid, and it's implemented, and it shows results. So although we are already talking about NIS2, so I don't think that NIS2 will not fulfill the purpose before we start to talk about NIS3. And in this case, I mean, we also need to take into account that it's, we need to go hand by hand with the progress, but also the time that it takes in the council. I'm here for 8 years, and I must say the legislations which are conducted and discussed and negotiated in the council on the cyber issues are one of the quickest one, to be honest, because normally the negotiations in the council and afterwards with the parliament can take years. And here we are really, with all the legislation that we have already adopted, we have tried to keep the race with the development of technologies. So I'm hoping that also the NIS2 will have this future-proof stamp on it, at least for the next 5, maybe 6 years. Let's see.
Svetlina, what's the mood in Parliament on this? Is there confidence that this is really future-proofed, or is this a band-aid to stem damage over the next few years until we can upgrade the system again? Artificial intelligence, quantum, these are not technologies that are going to stand still, and the advent of 5G deployed across Europe as well, the Internet of Things, autonomous driving, all the risk elements increase as the technology becomes more complicated and harder to manage at a governmental level as well. Don't you think?
I think we all agreed on that matter, and most of the speakers previously did highlight that point in terms of the increased risk, and that's why we need to be doing more proactively our work in terms of the regulation. Of course, when we're speaking about AI and all the new technologies, there are additional aspects added to the conversations. Here we're speaking about ethical aspects, social impact, which is also not that easy to regulate or to even quantify. So in terms of the risks ahead, I'm pretty sure there are even some which we would not be able to foresee at this standing point that we are now.
Okay, but in terms of how we manage that, how we scope out, whether it be a tech-neutral approach or whether it's a cooperation model, is it possible to build it into NIS2 to ensure that the response is quicker than perhaps it would have been in the past, that the support systems are stronger, more robust than they would have been in the past as well, even if we're not clear exactly what that risk is going to be? Svetlina.
I think this is, of course, we've aimed to do that in the current report, and it's up to us to see, and with the time, if we managed.
Okay, thank you, David. How do you see this in terms of changing technologies? We know the risk is increasing, but are we able to shape public policy around managing that risk in a sufficient timeline? I would say 5 years has passed. The next 5 years, we'll probably need to do this again. So, is the learning process here accelerating the political process, as Tamara has outlined, is clearly working much more smoothly than could normally be anticipated for this level of complexity? Is this a case where the political actors have been educated well enough to be able to identify the risk and work through in policy detail faster than before? Or is this simply another case of the European Union responding to crisis more effectively than it perhaps has done in the past?
No, I just take you up on the latter point there, Brian. No, I think the European Union is looking at the issue of cybersecurity and a lot of related policies in a very structured manner. I mean, NIS2 falls under the remit too of the broader EU strategies that have been promoted in the field of digital sovereignty and strategic autonomy. And just as Tamara mentioned earlier on about how NIS1 had successfully put in place a number of new initiatives, NIS2 also has enshrined within its compass that ENISA, the cooperation group, the European Union working with EU member states are to strategically review the operations of NIS2 in a very clear and structured way to take account of new and emerging tech trends. I mean, it's clearly the case that it's always been a challenge for legislators in Europe and across the world to keep abreast of the policy requirements for an evolving and changing tech world. But it's clearly my understanding, and it's certainly the objective of the European Union, that it is putting in place the governance structures to ensure that as new technologies do come on stream for broader society, and that means new techs that are used for all vertical industries, that the proper governance structures are put in place to ensure the safety and security of supply chains, because in the end of the day, that's the core objective for us all, is to ensure that cybersecurity is promoted at all times. In fact, cybersecurity and privacy protection are two halves of the same coin. But certainly the EU has put in place very strong governance structures to keep abreast of these new tech changes, and that's certainly the position as I see it from the European Commission, the European Parliament, and indeed the Council of Ministers.
Thank you, Clara. When we were speaking earlier just about social media platforms, it occurred to me that what we've seen recently in terms of Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram outages as well. There's the question of competition here as well, of market dominance, that we have oversized suppliers of digital services, which become critical issues for the supply chain and for the functioning of our economy and for our democracy as well. Do you think that competition and monopolies should be part of this discussion as well in terms of how we manage critical infrastructure and ensure cybersecurity?
I mean, I'll probably respond indirectly to this question. To me, it's really all about, risk management. And so, and I think this is where the NIS2 is doing really so well, that we moved away from the distinction of providers and really said, we're going to have a risk management mindset. And so, your regulatory measures, your defenses, your cybersecurity should be always proportional to the risk, the organization is posing to certain interest. And then, it is up to, the regulators to discuss what are the proportional measures, to take to address to the risk. So there may be a point where competition rules are a proportionate measure, to deal with the risk, that an organizational platform is posing to economy and society. So I think to me, it's really that here the biggest benefit or sort of the biggest improvement is really that risk management and reporting requirements, but they should be sort of that should sort of be the mindset, even when we're thinking about threats to democracy and economy, and what is a measure that is proportional to deal with the risk.
Thank you. Just say to our audience to send in questions now. We have still some time to put those to the panel, so please don't hesitate. Send your questions in right away. We'll put those directly. Let's talk a little bit about the distinction between what is important and what is essential as well. Svetlina, is the distinction clear enough in Parliament, or do people really have an issue with this? Is the scoping accepted as fair?
Well, I think we've tried to define that as good as possible. We've already managed to think about that in the beginning of our conversation. So beyond the list of essential operators, sectors like cloud and data services, aerospace, telecoms, central government IT systems, also the new additions as we've already mentioned. And a lighter reporting regime is envisioned for the new important entities, such as the manufacturing, postal services, chemicals, digital service providers. So I think it's pretty clear in terms of the way we divide them and define them. So there shouldn't be any discrepancy or misunderstanding in terms of the extensive lists we have included.
Okay, Tamara, we'll talk about the enforcement here now as well. Now, given the number of essential entities in scope here, the enforcement seems to be perhaps the politically most contentious dynamic of this as well. What is enforcement going to look like in NIS2, and what's the scope for harmonization? And would you have confidence that it would be enforced equally and fairly across the European Union? Because lack of enforcement in one area opens up a market opportunity in another member state as well. So, in terms of a fair single market, there's an issue with that too. It's not just a cyber security element. Tamara.
Yes, and I will just continue on the cybersecurity element, because this directive is not standalone island. It's going simultaneously with discussions on CER directive, CER. So that's the Critical Entities Directive, which is actually for the physical security of critical entities. And their sectors are the same as our essential one. So these two directives are going simultaneously, and so that we will address both cybersecurity and the physical security of critical entities. Coming back to your question, yes, it's a difficult one. How to enforce? Of course, there are some fines foreseen in the regulation, which we are still discussing. Of course, there is also the obligation of the national authorities to try to implement the NIS directive into national legislation so that it's harmonized in all member states. This is something that's it's going to be, of course, especially not knowing what is going to be the end result of negotiations, but having in mind the NIS1 directive, where we had some differences between member states when it comes to the implementation and the identification of operators of essential services. But that's why this directive is actually trying to overcome those gaps and try to find the solutions so that we, on the level of the EU, we have a harmonized approach. There is also something that's it's very important to mention. It's the issue of the cyber hygiene, in the sense that it's, of course, it's something that it's, I mean, we that are working with it, we know that how important it is, but the entities are not always aware. From the political point of view, I don't know if you have read the recent European Council conclusions where the cyber was mentioned very prominent. So the political level has actually saw the importance, and they are stressing it over and over. But now it's also on the business level to see the importance of the cybersecurity. And here there is another point that I would like to stress is the amount of information and the amount of that is going to be of obligation that is going to be the new one for some entities. But from the other side, when we talk about reporting, we need also to think about the other side of the coin, and this is the national CSIRTs, which are going to be recipients of those informations coming from the entities on the incidents and threats. So there we also need, especially from the perspective of the smaller countries, needs to think about how not to introduce additional administrative burden for the entities and the private sector, but also for those who are going to deal with those reports and those information received from the entities. So it's going to be a very tough discussion how to achieve a balance, between those two sides, but also not jeopardize the cybersecurity in a global one.
Thank you. Svetlina, Parliament has previous on this when it comes to defending small, medium-sized businesses as well, where there's been too much of a burden placed on those who perhaps can least afford it, and also in terms of enforceability and penalties. We have another question here from PG, who says, we've heard from Clara that NIS2 is based on risk management, but he asks, who determines measures implemented by the business to determine whether it's proportionate to the risk, the business themselves, the national regulator, or the European Commission? So who determines the measures and the proportionality of the risk? Maybe Tamara want to offer comments on this.
Well, in the directive itself, there are some conditions that needs to be fulfilled. Then you have the national cybersecurity strategies, which are actually putting those conditions into the force through the national legislation. So it's so it's not the just simple thing, but you need also to take into account the current status in the member states, because not, for example, if you have the food producer in one member states, it doesn't have the same status as the one in the other member states. So you need also to take this regional or national differences between the member states. But as said, the main preconditions are foreseen in the directive. So, and then on member states how to implement them in the national legislation.
Okay, thank you. And just another quick follow-up, Tamara, and then back to David and Clara. From Tapir, Tapir asked, the Council is thinking about designating all entities with 50 employees as essential regardless of the sector they operate in. Why did the member states decide to take this approach?
It's still in the discussion, so we had done. Yeah, okay. So it was a proposal of the Commission, but we are still discussing in the Council what kind of small and micro enterprises, but also the medium one, are going to be in the scope of the directive, because at the moment the large one are automatically in the scope, but there are some conditions for others to be met before they can be in the scope of the directive.
Thank you. David, we've touched on a lot of different topics across this discussion here. For not just Huawei, but also companies of your size and in so many different markets as well. Are you confident that the European Union has the right sensibility to do what's needed to protect the tech sector, to protect the economy, and to build a resilient structure for the foreseeable future, at least?
Well, one saw the speech that was given by the President of the European Commission, President von der Leyen, recently in the European Parliament, where she outlined clearly that cybersecurity is a core priority, core political priority for the European Union. And I do believe that, in essence, the proposals concerning NIS2 are balanced, But there are a number of issues that are going to have to be sorted out at trilogue under the French presidency. The reality is, if the NIS2 rules and regulations are going to be implemented, they have to be enforced. So the 27 member states of the European Union are going to have to put in place proper structures to enforce those rules. Evidently, there are some punitive provisions there for companies that may breach these rules, 2% fines, for example, but in fact that's actually quite low compared to the reputational damage that can be done to companies that do not comply with not only the legal spirit of NIS2, but also not only the legal requirements of NIS2, but also the spirit of that proposal. Certainly it's the case that a lot of discussions still have to take place about how and if particular SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, are going to be included within the provisions of NIS2. I mean, it's already the case that the number of companies that are going to fall under the scope of NIS2 is going to increase into tens of thousands. Bear in mind, though, there are 25 million small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe as it stands. So, as Tamara said earlier on in the conversation, NIS2 is about striking the balance between supporting economic development and managing the risk. So, a lot done, more to do, so to speak.
Let me ask you on this as well, because the supply chains are so tightly integrated as well. The large players, how they set the standards for the partners that they will work with as well. So is it really necessary that NIS2 bundles SMEs and micro businesses into this as well, when the reality is that the commercial dynamics of selling into supply chains with large partners, it's those large partners that will set the standard. That we can't even get certain organizations to permit Zoom, for example, because of risk in terms of broadcast. Because in each company has its own strict rules as well, whether that would be to do with food hygiene or cybersecurity as well. So is the commercial dynamic here perhaps even the stronger lever for SMEs compared to what the Commission could propose? David?
No, at the core of what businesses want is certainty, so that businesses can actually take decisions in a certain business environment. And it is really, in a way, very difficult to decompartmentalize global supply chains, because actually global supply chains are not just the vestige of large companies. Global supply chains integrate small, medium and large scale companies. But at the core of the objective of NIS2 is to strike the balance between ensuring high levels of cybersecurity in Europe and ensuring the promotion of economic development across the European Union. That's the core purpose of NIS2. But I would come back to a point I mentioned earlier on. I mean, enshrined within NIS2 should be a zero trust approach. There should be harmonized rules. There should be certified rules, certified standards drawn up by organizations like ENISA in cooperation with EU member states, so that can give the certainty that businesses need in relation to complying, understanding and working within the legal requirements laid down by NIS2, and also working within the spirit of NIS2. It was a very important point, I think, made earlier on, that NIS2 is just not only about legal compliance alone, even though that is of paramount importance. It's also about making sure that all companies, all organizations from the public, private, education, research communities are aware of cybersecurity and put in place proper cybersecurity strategies to mitigate this risk. So NIS2 serves many positive functions in that context.
Thank you. Clara, just to wrap up on the enforceability side of this as well, how do you see this play out? Politically, this is difficult for parliamentarians to do anything which will damage the profitability of SMEs by increasing burdens. We're coming out of a deep recession. COVID is still impacting as well. There's a lot to contend with as well. We're probably looking at another round of austerity, tax rises as well. So how do you convince SMEs in this that enforceability with punishment and penalties is a good way forward?
when it comes to the sizes of the companies, as it was part of the discussion, the number of employees, I mean, one can really, unfortunately, and I'm glad I don't have to decide or ride the directive, is that, on one hand, we say, okay, it's a small company, so the impact of a potential cybersecurity breach or incidents or impact on the state of resilience can be small. But when it comes to technology, I disagree, because a company of 3 employees, can have a pretty large societal impact. And at the same time, we've talked about how many small businesses there are in Europe. So if you think about their combined, power, and sort of the combined weight in the economy, they are very, very important. And so cybersecurity has to be important. And I understand it can be a small 2-3 person shop, but they do not operate in isolation. They operate as as part of an ecosystem, and they should be treated as such. Now what to do, I think this has been in my previous jobs. I worked quite a lot with the small businesses. I mean, this is the $1 million question or €1 million question. How you work with the small businesses. And I think a lot of the governments within their national strategies, within their sort of domestic initiatives, there's a lot of effort being put into the small businesses. Part of the recovery, a lot of countries are putting in place the recovery, sort of a COVID recovery schemes, and have been, cybersecurity has to be the priority, because we have seen the rise of the incidents during the pandemic because we relied much more on doing everything online. And so when you think about recovery, when you think about, how do you stimulate this sector, part of stimulating the sector, I mean, every government I know of has this interest in stimulating, the small business sector. It should be the item number 2 on the list, how you do it. We do it by helping them with cybersecurity, with the tools, with the training. It's no longer an afterthought for these businesses like it used to be, and I really do think that when you go and do your little, small business license, it should be part of your conversation with the national authority. And I'm not saying, imposing a regulation, but there should be this offering, of tools to elevate your, to elevate your resilience. I mean, I used to work with a small business toolkit. It was a toolkit of tools for small businesses, and they actually said, we, as a small business, we don't actually want to report cybercrime. One example, because we do it and nothing happens to us. Like, our situation doesn't improve. And so the organizations that wanted the small businesses to report on cybercrime, to understand it, once they started to offer them the tools or training, there was a much more sort of a conversation about the threat and the crime. So, there's ways to do it, but it should be made a priority.
Thank you. Perfect. Let's go to our final remarks. We're just almost out of time. So 30 seconds each. Svetlina, over to you to start. Final remarks. What does NIS2 mean in terms of changes for the tech sector? What's important?
NIS2 is a good step forward and a good improvement of what we've built so far as a framework, but we should be clear on the fact that there are going to be new challenges and risks we cannot estimate at this point coming up, but I'm sure as regulators we're going to manage to tackle them in the right way for our SMEs and consumers.
Thank you. Tamara.
I agree with Svetlana 100%, and adding only that NIS2, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all the issues and problems that we have with cybersecurity in Europe, but for sure it's a good step forward. And we are hoping that it's going to be implemented as soon as possible, so that also the entities, the subjects, the companies, and the others who are part of the whole ecosystem are going to be more secure and enjoy the benefits of doing business in a secure environment.
Thank you. Clara.
I think that the success and of this directive, and as always, the devil is going to be in the detail. And I think one thing that's going to be very important, that in those discussions about implementation, how you provide guidance and best practices and advice on implementation, it should be a conversation and a dialogue within different bodies that includes businesses, that includes small businesses, that includes civil society, and all those who are impacted by this directive being in the scope, or they are being impacted by cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you. David, last word.
Cybersecurity is a top political priority for the European Union, but for NIS2 to be successful, we should put in place common, clear, open, transparent, certified rules, so that businesses know clearly what their obligations are from a technical viewpoint in terms of the need to comply with the provisions of NIS2 moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you to Svetlina, Tamara, Clara, and to David for an excellent discussion today. We covered a lot of ground today. Thank you also to our audience for all the questions you put forward. This discussion will be available on YouTube. It's promoted on social media afterwards. Feel free to reshare that, and you can continue the discussion using hashtag EA Debates. Also, thanks to your active team, Zoran, Malto, Jacques, and Tamara, and to Huawei for their support today. I wish you all a good day. I'm Brian Maguire.